Good morning. It's Sunday, so once again I don't sleep. Happy Father's Day to those of you in the U.S. I don't know if anybody else celebrates Father's Day. I always consider it kind of one of those Hallmark days where we got to sell some cards. Let's come up with a holiday. But if those across the world do celebrate it, Happy Father's Day. If not, hey, dads, everyone still cares. I'd show you my world's greatest dad mug, but once again I have not received it. I've been waiting for that for 30 years or so, and I don't know why. My kids just keep forgetting to give me the world's greatest dad mug. Okay, today a little different video. I want to talk about soundtracks. And really, one thing I'm interested in is if you comment, tell me what your favorite soundtracks are. Here's my thought on soundtracks. Soundtracks are a part of our life. They mold us. They bring us into new worlds. Think of your favorite movie. What made it great? Generally, it's the soundtrack. Now, if you don't like music, it's not a big deal. My wife doesn't get into music. She hears nothing of the music when we watch a movie. Myself, I don't really hear the dialogue. I'm listening to the musical score. A bad movie, to me, can become a great movie if it has a wonderful soundtrack. And obviously every soundtrack's different, and they bring different emotions, but that's what it's about, the emotions that it creates. Did it make the hair on your arm stand up when you heard it? That's a great soundtrack. In my collection, I have hundreds of soundtracks, mostly in CDs. Quite a few of them I bought because there's one or two songs that I liked, but there are some that really shaped my life. So I want to show you the ones that really meant a lot to me, but I'm also really interested on the ones that meant a lot to you. So share those. So the first one here, Grand Prix. All right, this came out in 1966. I was 7 years old. Do the math. We went to Chicago to see my grandmother. Came from a little small town in Nebraska, and my mom she was in love with James Gardner. Let's just face it, she thought he was great. James Gardner was in this movie, so she wanted to go see it. So that's what we did. And the movie was in a new kind of a place where they had new speakers, kind of a surround sound thing. So we went there and we saw the Grand Prix, and this was by Maurice Jarre. I probably, my French isn't good. I got three things about this movie. First off, it was the first time at age 7 I got my very first migraine and wound up throwing up outside. Why? It was so loud. Number 2, I became an auto racing fanatic. At age 7, suddenly, auto racing was everything. I never missed an Indy 500 since then. It was a beautiful race. This was Formula One. Loved Formula. I loved everything about racing. But 3, it got me into music. There were already soundtracks. You had The Jungle Book. There's Snow White. I mean, Disney, let's face it. When you're growing up, Disney is a soundtrack. Pixar is a soundtrack as a child. But this told me I liked other types of music. And the score was such that the horns sounded like cars racing by. It had a lot of French feel to it, but again, this was filmed in Europe. It was about Grand Prix, very 60s, but the music was wonderful. It stuck with me. At age 7, this stuck with me, and I could never get the Grand Prix out of my head. And it's probably the most influential soundtrack because it really kind of shaped what I liked in music. Next one, Dr. No. All right. This came out in 1963. I did not see it in the theater, but because it wasn't Disney, we weren't going to go see it and didn't have James Gardner. But when it first came out on TV, the James Bond theme blew me away. That guitar work on there, and then there was all this Caribbean music, and it was again very 60s. Lots of great James Bond soundtracks. but to me they all date. You know, they have the theme song, but they all become kind of dated. To me, this one never got dated. Maybe because it didn't have the theme song. But Dr. No brought us that James Bond intro. And, you know, to this day, it's still one of the greatest things. I love it. All right, this thing was huge for me. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Again, this is the record store day release, but I have the original. I got it in CD. Did not see it in the theaters. This came out, I believe, in 1968, if I remember right. That was everything. In Ennio Morricone. Jeez, I wish I could say more names. He made so many great Western soundtracks. He was the king of the spaghetti Western. I've watched this movie a billion times, but you know what? I track to the places where it has my favorite music, because the music made that movie. I mean, you just think about that ending fight scene. It was the music that made it exciting. This is all about the soundtrack. Again, one of my all-time favorite soundtracks. Next we're jumping all the way up to 1981. The Natural, okay, with Robert Redford. I think it was 81, wasn't it? Yeah, 1981. Man, talk about getting old. This was done by Randy Newman. So what's interesting about Randy Newman is just the Newman family. Randy Newman, his dad was a doctor, but his uncle, he had his two uncles, Alfred and Lionel. Both of them were soundtrack composers, very famous one. In fact, Alfred Newman, he'd already won 9 Academy Awards for his stuff, and he did, you know, The King and I, and his brother Lionel. He was up for 11 nominations, but he only got 1 Academy Award, and that was for Hello, Dolly. But then Alfred had 3 kids, and they all they got into soundtracks. There's David Newman, there was Thomas Newman, and a daughter, Maria Newman, who actually has a son, Joey Newman. All of them. They're all prodigies, music prodigies. They all got into soundtracks. It's just crazy. So this was one by Randy Newman. We all know him from Short People, but this soundtrack made the hair on my arms. This is one of those that made the hair on my arms stand up, if you've seen it. You know, especially the closing scene where Robert Redford steps up to the bat. He had a surgery. He's beginning to bleed. It's raining out, and he hits the ball. And lightning hits the ball. The jacket comes off. But the music that was part of it. Oh, my goodness. I mean, God, the hair on the back of my neck standing up right now. It was beautiful. I mean, this was just an incredibly wonderful soundtrack coming from Randy Newman. And to this day, it's still one of my all-time favorites. I've listened to it again and again. I mean, the ones I'm showing, the reason why I really picked these is these are soundtracks I've played maybe 100 times. I never tire of them. This one came out, I believe, 1989. Edward Scissorhands. So we're going to go in now to, I do have some CDs on here. 1990, Edward Scissorhands. This is by Danny Elfman. He's made a billion different soundtracks out there. You know him from Oingo Boingo. But then he got into soundtrack work, and this to me was a complete soundtrack of his. It was so beautiful. Just again, it's one of those that gave me goosebumps when I heard it. It took a movie that it was okay to me, but it made it into a beautiful movie. It created a love story on there, and I just think it's a complete work. I love every track on here from the first to the end. Edward Scissorhands. Then there was this one. Had CD. I got this just recently. Twin Peaks. All right, it's a TV show for those of you that do not know. This was done by, you would think you'd have all these. Angelo Badalamenti. obviously Italian. This was an extremely creepy TV show, all right? And I mean, it was bizarre, to say the least. It was on for 3 seasons, and it recently just came back on Showtime. The music was moody. The music was scary. I mean, it brought out such emotion. You had Laura Palmer's theme, the Twin Peaks theme, Audrey's dance, Nightingale. It had this cool jazz to it, but a very creepy jazz. One of those low tremolo guitars on there. Really neat music. Man, that came out, I bought that CD. I played it in my car over and over. I mean, I became obsessed with it. It's still one of my all-time favorite TV shows. And the reason why? The music. It was also just kind of a really quirky show, so really neat. This came out in the early 90s, Meet Joe Black. So I talked about Randy Newman. This is Thomas Newman. Thomas Newman made this soundtrack. I love a lot of his soundtrack work. This was with a very young Brad Pitt. Again, the movie was okay, but the soundtrack was fantastic. It brought out the emotion. Of death coming to your door and death living with you and falling in love with the daughter of the guy that death was going to take. And the soaring soundtrack, the beautiful violins, orchestration was absolutely incredible, and I really loved it. And what's interesting is Thomas Newman's had 10 nominations for Academy Awards. He has yet to win one. He has the most nominations of anybody and has yet to win one. But I love his work. Another one, Finding Forrester, okay? This soundtrack was all about jazz. This soundtrack got me into Ornette Coleman. It got me into Bill Frisell, and it introduced me to Miles Davis. This came out in 1990. And it just... This jazz that was put into it. The critics, some liked the movie, some didn't. I loved the movie. I watched it a million times. But why did I watch it? The music attracted me to it. Finding Forrester. Really found it super interesting. Then came out in 1990. Had a lot of movies, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, from the Coen brothers. All right. You talk about anything that gets you into roots music. These were the guys that really got roots music going. Not much there. I've ordered the LP. There's a picture disc. But again, this really got me into a lot with Alison Krauss, Norman Blake. There's Gillian Welch is on here. The Soggy Bottom Boys. That's just kind of made up. The Stanley Brothers, the Cox family. It's just a phenomenal group. Again, it just took this movie that was made on Homer's Odyssey, but just super quirky because of the Coen brothers, and really brought it to life. But Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, fantastic music. Then another one from 1990, Pleasantville. Pleasantville, again, I don't know how well it did in the box office. What really caught my eye is Fiona Apple did Across the Universe. I thought she did a beautiful rendition. This introduced me to Dave Brubeck's Take 5. I'd heard it before, but didn't mean anything to me. I heard it on here, and it caught my attention. Also, it introduced me to So What from Miles Davis. I had Etta James. It made me appreciate what she's done on there. Billy Ward's on here. Gene Vincent. There was just a lot of wonderful music from the 50s. Brought into this, and then the final score, the big suite, was done by Randy Newman, and so it introduced me to a whole nother group of music, and that's what I like about soundtracks. They introduce you to new things, and suddenly you start to explore and you start to buy that. Then this was kind of a quirkier one, Stranger Than Fiction. This was Will Ferrell on here. This is one that has a lot of different artists, okay? Most of these are, set composers, which I love, but I have millions of them, a lot of different artists. And why I did this one is there's some wonderful Vangelis tunes on here. Spoon does a lot of great work, but it introduced me to Reckless Eric, and I became obsessed with that song. My God, A Whole Wide World. And I mean, I'm looking for that. Someday I want to find that LP, with Reckless Eric's Whole Wide World. But again, I thought, it had the jam. It really made the movie. My final one, this just came out a couple years ago, La La Land. Have you ever had that song that once you play it, it won't get out of your head, and at 3 in the morning it's playing over and over, and the next day it's playing over and over? That is La La Land to me. My God, I mean, I'm scared to put this on just because I'm going to be playing it in my brain for the rest, for another week. I loved the soundtrack. It was, again, a lot of great jazz in here. It was beautiful music. It made the movie. Just probably one of my all-time favorite soundtracks, but I can't get it out of my head, so I can't play it. Just some honorable mention. Those are the ones I really, really loved. But there was Nightmare Before Christmas. I recently got this neat kind of picture disc of Nightmare Before Christmas. Danny Elfman, super quirky. He did this. Tim Burton, his movie Nightmare Before Christmas. Wonderful soundtrack. I played that a ton. The other ones I really did a million times in my car. Kill Bill 1. Fun music on here. Introduced me to some neat things like the 5, 6, 7, 8s were on here. Isaac Hayes is on here. El Hurd. Nancy Sinatra's title tune is fantastic. There's Alfred Hitchcock. If you ever watched Alfred Hitchcock, the 3 movies, and again, the composer is Bernard Herrmann, and he did a lot of Hitchcock movies, especially his big stuff. But you think of Vertigo, which is my all-time favorite Hitchcock soundtrack. There's Psycho, and there's North by Northwest. All incredible scores. If you ever see them in vinyl or on CD, well worth if you want to listen to a wonderful soundtrack. And then there's High Fidelity. And this is the one, again, I played a billion times. Favorite on here was, I didn't know about the Beta Band, and they have the Drier Rain. And, they play that song, it's in a record store, and they put this on, and all the people start going like this to Drier Rain. They just start bopping their head because it makes you bop. I just love that scene. But, for the record collectors, this is like soundtrack to record collecting. So those to me are some of the most influential soundtracks I've listened to that really meant a lot to me, that brought me into new types of music, and that I found very, very enjoyable. But I am interested on what your soundtracks are, because we all have a soundtrack. We have a soundtrack of our life. So what is the soundtrack of your life? Share it so I can listen to it too. Have a wonderful Father's Day. Look at that. Hey, it's 5 o'clock now. I think I'll go take a nap so I can get up and get my day going. Thanks for tuning into my channel.